Hey everyone, this is Shenandoah County Sheriff Tim Carter, and thanks for being here today. Today I've got a special guest with me. I've got Senator Mark Obenshain. He's my state senator and this region state senator. Glad to have you here with us today.
Well, Tim, it's good to be with you. Weren't we elected same year?
I was going to say, I think both of us have been in office 2003, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on the same cycle, and we're both running for election the first year. I actually, now that I think about it, I'll never forget that year.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah, me too. And you know what? You can tell our hair's a little bit grayer. We look a little bit tireder than we were back then.
My hair was jet black when I ran. I don't know whether to blame it on politics or my children, but I don't think I have much black hair left.
I think I get a gray hair every day, but I won't say what it's about. But hey, listen, thanks again for coming in and talking with me. I know you're busy. There's been a lot going on in the law enforcement world, a lot going on in state legislation this year. I mean, you guys had a special session last year. You had your normal session, what I would call the regular session this year, which I think lasted a little bit longer than normal. And there's a lot of local impact stuff that's come out of that with regard to law enforcement in particular.
Yeah, well, last year, I mean, what a crazy year. We had our budget session at the General Assembly back in, I guess, January, February, and the beginning of March. And as we were adjourning General Assembly, COVID was starting to break out. And we knew that it was going to have a big impact on budgets and on our ability to finance our fundamental needs. So when we left Richmond, we pretty much knew we were going to be coming back for a special session to deal with the budget.
Right.
And then, of course, Minneapolis happened,
right.
and George Floyd's death, and protests all over the country, including in Richmond and in communities up and down the valley. And all of a sudden, what started out as a budget session,
right.
a special session for the budget, became a session to deal with what I guess has been popularly characterized by our governor as a social justice session.
Right.
And that really dominated it more than the budget, as it turns out.
I know. Yeah, I was kind of part of those conversations. I was just coming out of being the president of Virginia Sheriff's Association. And you're right, we went into that special session thinking it was going to be all about money and the fiscal impact. And instead, it was actually more about reform issues than anything.
Yeah, and Sheriff, I know you were chairman or president of the Virginia Sheriff's Association, and that's an organization that does great good, is a great advocate. I think you probably had John Jones on recently,
right.
And the Sheriff's Association and you were front and center during the discussion of many of these police reform, law enforcement reform measures. And, we've been fighting to keep Virginia safe, keep our communities safe. And, when I look at the fundamental responsibilities of government, there's nothing more fundamental than maintaining public order. And there was a little bit of cognitive dissonance, I think, this past year over how are we supposed to look at law enforcement. And the whole focus during the special session was on taking power away from law enforcement. And, I was pretty deeply disturbed by some of the legislation that was perking through and looked at our really great law enforcement in Virginia as the real source of the problem. And that's not to say that we don't have problems in law enforcement, but I tend to think that they're more isolated rather than embedded throughout the fiber of our law enforcement community in Virginia.
Right. I tell you, from a local perspective, it came to us pretty quickly. Like, for example, the new search warrant criteria for law enforcement. Just getting our policies up to date, making sure that everybody is trained and up to speed on what the new law changes are you didn't even have, usually, when you guys go through a legislative session, you get the bills that come out in January, February, and you got about 4 or 5 months to kind of get things straight before you actually have to implement some of these changes. Some of the stuff, you haven't had that kind of time. When I say you, the law enforcement agencies haven't had that kind of time. We've been keeping up with it as best we can, but it has come pretty quick and pretty fast. I know from my perspective, I asked my board of supervisors for an accreditation manager. I've asked them for a full-time training officer. I've asked them for a full-time IT data management position for body camera equipment that we have. And right now I can say the accreditation manager is still in our budget. That's a full-time position. And the IT manager is in our budget. But in other words, what we've done in the past, we'll have these programs and we do the best we can with the resources we have. But because of the volume of the legislation, the speed at which the legislation has come, it's almost like you've got to have those positions, or you should have had them 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm not sure if, of course, I'm not trying to be critical of our legislators, but I don't know that anyone really thought about, that local impact on the smaller agencies.
Now, I can absolutely tell you that there was not any serious consideration given to those concerns, and that was a subject of a lot of debate during the course of session. People like Todd Gilbert and I were trying to stand in the gap and point out the burden that many of these legislative ideas were going to be placing on smaller law enforcement agencies. And, a lot of these ideas, in a perfect world, they may be great. A lot of them, though, are solutions in search of a problem, at least in most areas of Virginia. And, you mentioned the search warrant issue.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my goodness, what they were initially talking about was, essentially a ban on no-knock searches. And, and I know that there are circumstances in which, you've got to go into a dwelling or a business, and there may be exigent circumstances, somebody's life at risk, evidence is about to be destroyed, drugs are about to be flushed, and you've just got to go in fast in order to protect safety, protect evidence, to protect children who may be being exploited. And folks who were advocating some of these proposals, they just hear the bad stories. Mm-hmm. They don't and haven't taken the time to understand that there may be a time, 1 in 100 times, when a search warrant is being executed in which, safety of somebody is going to depend upon rapid execution of that search warrant.
All right. Senator, I often wonder, well, I thought we made use of the Crime Commission, and I thought the Crime Commission would kind of, for lack of better words, vet some of these issues that legislators are having in the debates and whatnot. I don't know if that actually occurred this year when it comes to like the particulars of what the search warrant changes or what have you. It just didn't seem like that. Maybe they did, and I just didn't know it.
They did not. I mean, the Crime Commission is an organization that was established, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago to take a look at evolving issues in criminal justice and community safety, and make recommendations for keeping our communities safe and safer, and addressing new trends and new developments in criminal behavior and in law enforcement. And last year, unfortunately, from my perspective, control of the General Assembly flipped. I was chairman of the Senate Courts of Justice Committee and chairman of the Crime Commission. And when Democrats took control of the state Senate, they reorganized, and every Republican was taken off of the Crime Commission. I'd served as chairman of it, and I'm now off of it entirely. And I think it it hurts its ability to build consensus when you're only listening to one side. I value the kind of collaborative approach that the Crime Commission has traditionally taken to try and listen to all sides of the debate and fashion a solution that is not a partisan political solution. And, that kind of reorganization was taking place about then, and folks were in such a rush to get many of these ideas before the General Assembly and passed, and it was in the shadows of these nationwide protests, so there was a lot of political pressure, and the Crime Commission operates more deliberatively.
Right.
And they just didn't have an opportunity to consider many of these ideas and many of these proposals, and I think that was is unfortunate.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. That was very disappointing. To your point, I know you and I had a communication regarding the funding for school resource officers, and that I believe, as I recall, the funding was on the chopping block, for lack of a better phrase. But in Shenandoah County, and I got to tell you, that floored me, because in Shenandoah County, it's an extremely popular program. It's we don't have a school resource officer program to incarcerate young people. We have a school resource officer program to protect those young people and provide a safe environment for them to learn. And, that's something that the public actually demanded here when we were looking into this issue. They wanted that additional safety and security and protection for their kids. And when I heard that other jurisdictions, I don't want to say that it's being misused or mismanaged, but when I heard that it was so unpopular in other jurisdictions, it made me wonder, well, how are they managing that? Because it should be a positive thing. I mean, I think everybody wants their child to be safe. And I don't know, it's just, to me, it was a very foreign concept when I heard that that people wanted to actually pull the funding. And there are actually some jurisdictions that did, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the crazier things that happened, and one of the crazier debates. I mean, we've had so many tragedies across the country with school shootings, and that has just really ripped the heart out of a lot of communities across the country. And as we try to figure out how to deal with those challenges, one of the most productive ways has been through school resource officers, putting somebody from the sheriff's office or the city police department in the schools. And these folks are carefully selected, and I mean, in virtually every instance that I'm aware of, are really positive influences who kids look up to and develop relationships with, and they really do add to the positive learning environment that exists in these schools. And I think that this is one of the other ideological issues that crept into that special session was, some people just decided that the police are the enemy in every instance. And one of the members of the House and one of the members of the Senate proposed withdrawing all funding for school resource officers. And that blew my mind as well. And fortunately, we have enough folks on both sides of the aisle who have a modicum of common sense, and that did not ultimately see the light of day. But I think it indicates, some of the mindset of what of the challenges that you're dealing with.
And it goes back to your point about being deliberative when you're trying to make decisions like that. Because I would hope that the state would allow those particular school systems to do what's best for those school systems. I mean, I get it. We all get federal funding. We all get state funding. But, each one is their own their own little world, their own responsibility. And if a community like Shenandoah County has a good program, it works well within Shenandoah County, I don't understand why you'd want to disrupt that.
Well, it really goes to you're exactly right. And it, I think, highlights the diversity of our Commonwealth. And frankly, what works in one part of Virginia isn't going to work in other parts of Virginia. Maybe in Fairfax County, law enforcement is 3 minutes away from a school, even if a resource officer isn't in the school. But you go out to Lee County or Scott County, and there's schools that it's going to take 20, 30 minutes for law enforcement to respond to be able to get to. And heck, there's schools in Shenandoah County that it's going to take a little while to get help to if it's, heaven forbid, ever needed.
Right. Senator, let's talk a little bit about technology. I know we purchased body cameras for deputies many years ago. We did that after we had an incident that occurred in the town of Woodstock, and they were actually field testing field cameras that night. And it was very beneficial because it gave you a clear picture of what happened. And the issue that I have, the difficulty, I guess, that I have as a police administrator and law enforcement administrator is managing the data. It's a tremendous amount of data. And, I think it's important to be transparent. I think it's important from an officer safety standpoint to have that video, that picture of actually what happened either to the officer or that the officer, was involved in. Any thoughts on that?
That
technology. Again, there's been no state funding for that either, by the way.
I thought you weren't going to beat up on me.
Well, I'm not beating up on you.
I'm teasing you. Now, look, and my background. I spent 10 years professionally working with law enforcement agencies as a lawyer, defending civil suits in which law enforcement agencies are sued and police officers were sued for bad things that had happened. And back when I did that, there were no body cameras. And I can tell you that in terms of protecting law enforcement and protecting citizens, it's a great development. And I think it's great to have that accessible, but it does present a lot of challenges. And you've identified one is data storage. When can you get rid of it? Virtually never. It's a real challenge to figure out how long you're supposed to or able to keep that data. Then you look beyond the technological issues of storage, and every defense lawyer, every time somebody is arrested or cited for drunk driving to serious crimes, they are asking for all of the body camera footage and all of the dash cam footage. And if defense lawyers are asking for it, then the prosecutors have to see it too. Right. So it is creating manpower issues, and frankly, in some jurisdictions in Virginia, it has been so dire that prosecutors have said we can't handle certain misdemeanors anymore because of the demands that are being placed upon us. And now some of that may have been stage managed a little bit, but the point is very real. It takes a lot of resources in law enforcement agencies. It takes resources in prosecutors' offices, and for those jurisdictions with public defenders, it takes resources there.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about training while we're talking about resources. I don't know if you're aware of this, but we belong to a regional training academy, the one in Weir's Cave, and as many jurisdictions in your region do. The basic academy, I believe, is 20 weeks long. There's a field training portion afterwards where the officer is paired up with an actual instructor for about 6 to 8 weeks. And then we have a post-academy where we actually bring them through a 2-week program and go over like our policies and our procedures and what's specific to the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office. We're putting a tremendous amount of investment in a young deputy. And I haven't seen what the impact of the legislation is going to be on that, but my feeling is that academy is going to expand. There's going to be additional time in field training that we have to do to make sure people are squared away on the new policies and the changes or the new methodology or whatever we're doing. And again, I go back to, I feel like I'm beating, just replaying this record over and over. But when you're in Richmond, please make sure that you tell people, we probably need to look at that physical impact over all these additional things. Because I know that in Richmond, if it's going to affect a Richmond, a state organization, they'll do a physical impact on that, on the change. But I can tell you, it's going to be a tremendous amount more that we'll have to do with regard to what the regional training academies are going to have to perform, and what the law enforcement, the small agencies, the big agencies are going to have to do just to keep up with new legislation that came out of this past year.
Yeah, and there is a huge difference in the perspective of those of us who represent rural Virginia as opposed to the legislators who represent urban and suburban Virginia. For folks in Fairfax County, and I hate to keep coming back to that, but that's representing an increasing percentage of the Commonwealth, and they worry a lot less about the fiscal impact of training law enforcement than does a smaller county in rural Virginia. And folks, again, like Todd, Gilbert, and I, we have that perspective. We understand the burden that this places on counties' budgets and on the budgets of sheriff's offices, and we are speaking out and encouraging restraint and consideration of that local fiscal impact. And I can tell you that you're right, Sheriff, when legislation is proposed that is going to have an impact on the state budget, they are very quick to attach a fiscal impact statement. And you look at the number of full-time employees that it's going to increase, and even if it's adding one or two new employees to the state budget, that often is enough to kill a piece of legislation because we can't afford it. But nobody seems to care quite as much about the local fiscal impact. And while it's raised, it isn't quite the impediment because, honestly, many people look at it as other people's money and not the state's money. And that's wrong. It absolutely is wrong. It needs to be more foremost in consideration. Again, I was on the Finance Committee for, I guess, about 8 years. And with the flipping control of the General Assembly, I lost the somewhat tenuous grip on the purse strings of the Commonwealth that I once had. And I hope that we'll be able to get a hold of some more ability to exercise fiscal restraint and protect our local governments.
Right. And Senator, I guess as a final topic, and we may want to have just a podcast on this topic one day, but I did want to mention to you, I want a statewide work group regarding the Marcus Alert System. And I'll be the first to say that I think there needs to be more resources for people with substance abuse issues and behavioral health issues and mental health issues. But you probably, maybe you know this already, this is a tremendous unfunded mandate. And it's, there's this philosophical, I call it philosophical, but I mean, on the one hand, we want equality. We want people to get the same services in every jurisdiction throughout the Commonwealth. But as you mentioned, and I've pointed this out to the group, the counties of Henrico and Fairfax and places like that, they have resources that are not available out in Rockingham and Shenandoah County and Page County. I was telling the group the other day, I said, you guys don't understand, when I go into a budget meeting and I'm asking for a position, I don't think that we're staffed right now for the call volume for law enforcement. And the fire and rescue people probably don't think they're staffed for what they have to provide. And the schools don't think that they're staffed, and so on and so forth. And you got to have an understanding. I don't think the group, maybe some in the group, but a majority of the group, at least the state people in the group, I should say, I don't think they grasp that aspect of what we're doing, which is we're going to come up with a plan and leave it to those localities to implement this plan when you've got school systems, you've got fire and rescue, you've got other aspects of local government that don't think that they're already staffed enough. And now you're going to put off this new plan on how to handle these calls in the future. It's, again, we can probably talk just a podcast just on that. But you need to know that's, I don't know. I'm still trying to get my mind wrapped around how it's going to be pulled off, and there's no way I think you're going to have an equality from one jurisdiction to the other just because of resources.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. When this legislation was proposed, the purpose of it is good. We want to make sure that we are treating mental health issues, not as public safety issues.
Right.
To the extent we're able to. The law enforcement agencies I've worked with and am familiar with, you're out there every day trying to protect people from themselves or from others. And when you arrive on a scene, you're there to de-escalate and to protect people. And if Henrico or Richmond or Fairfax or Norfolk have mental health professionals that they are able to send out, God bless them. That's great. But I'm here to tell you that rural agencies don't have a mental health professional they can send out 24/7 on calls. And to say that you have to hire somebody to fill that role, that's probably not a big deal for a government the size of Fairfax County with 2 million people living in that county and paying the bills. But for a Shenandoah County, Rappahannock County, or Page County, that's a big deal.
Right. And Senator, not to get too far down in the weeds, but look at the difference. You have the new search warrant law where it requires uniform presence in the execution of search warrants. And Marcus Alert, the goal is to have no one in uniform respond to those incidents. I can't, again, I'm in an agency right now where I could use 4 or 5 more deputies just to do what we need to get done. And I can't see myself walking in and having a board of supervisors that would say, oh, you need a person 24/7 in plain clothes to handle mental health calls. Well, we'll give you 7 more positions for that. That's not going to happen. That's just not realistic. And then the other aspect of it is you've got some people, and these are mainly the people associated with the organizations out of Richmond. They think that, well, we can just take the law enforcement officers and place that money into these positions in the mental health field. Well, then you're going to jeopardize public safety in my mind. And that's what you're going to have to sell to the public, which I think is going to be a tough sell, and I've told the group that. So it's, when we get more to the point of, what the final plan is, I'd love to have you back and just talk about that, because I got to tell you, it's a difficult thing to get your mind wrapped around.
Well, there are a lot of people down there in Richmond who apparently live in a beautiful world, perfect world. One in which everything makes perfect sense. And, the real world, it's a little messier than that. The ACLU, on some things, maybe their heart's in the right place, but they lack a lot of practical experience. And I will have to say that the ACLU had an outsized influence in the crafting of many of these legislative initiatives. And we just need to take a second look at some of them, not because they are bad ideas in that perfect world,
right,
but because they are super challenging to implement in this imperfect world in which we live.
Right. Well, Senator, those were all the questions I had today for you. And again, I really appreciate you coming out and spending some time with me today. I appreciate all of the work that you do in Richmond for our region and for the Commonwealth. I know you've been very receptive to me when I have a question or concern about a piece of legislation. And is there anything you wanted to add today while you were here?
Well, a couple of things. One is if this is an open invitation to come back and talk again, I want to come back and talk about the parole issue sometime, and which
yes.
is looming super large. Second, I want to say right back at you, I appreciate everything that you do. You've been a real leader in Shenandoah County, in the Shenandoah Valley, and statewide in the Sheriff's Association. And I really appreciate your friendship. We've been friends for, gosh, I think more than 20 years now.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes,
And more than anything, I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. So again, with me today was Senator Mark Obenshain, and appreciate your time. Guys, follow me on Twitter at Timothy C. Carter or Facebook. Thanks so much.